After plenty of hip hop, faith, and life discussion on H2DG, with the 2024-25 NBA season right around the corner, it's time to share some thoughts that have been on my mind regarding the upcoming season, such as the shocking Cat and Julius Randle trade, DeMar Derozan's fit, or maybe lack thereof, with the Sacramento Kings, and a few second attempt scenarios, if you will, that certainly I have my eyes on a little closer this year. Like, for example, Jordan Poole's second year with the Washington Wizards, right? We definitely got a fat record, if you will, today, with our verse format for this episode. And as always, I'm excited to get into it all, get back on the NBA saddle of things and warm up for the latest season that's just about underway. Let's get it. Welcome to Hip to the Games, the podcast for you, the basketball junkie and the hip hop head. I'm your host, Desmond, and I too have had hoop dreams and enjoy the beautiful genre of hip hop and its history. Together, we will enjoy some of the greatest albums, songs, artists, players, moments, teams, and so much more, while even mixing the two on occasion, all in my hope that you remember why you love both or either of these to begin with. You'll soon understand that Hip to the Games is more than just a podcast, it's a lifestyle. And if you were looking for a platform that combines both basketball and hip hop, you've come to the right place. Welcome to another episode of Hip to the Games. Shout out to you if you are a loyal listener and are hip to the games. I sincerely appreciate you coming back to press play on your boy once again. And if you happen to be new to H2DG, welcome aboard. I'm happy to have you here. If throughout this episode you do like what you're hearing, be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that follow button on whatever platform you're listening to or watching on, and stay tapped in with all things hip to the games. And before we really get into today's episode, you already know the drill by now. I got to get my pregame shout outs out the way. All right. The first one always goes to the creative director, Jesus Christ, for another Hip to the Games episode. And it's always a blessing to get in front of this microphone and do what he's putting me to do, put this idea in me of all people, and just have the resources to do what he's placed in my heart. So all glory goes to him every episode, every day. And the second one goes to my 19 Media Group family for the opportunity to represent the home team. All right, you see that blue and white logo in the corner if you're watching on YouTube. And still, if for my audio listeners, if you're more tuned to the audio platforms, you saw it when in the logo when you hit Hip to the Games. That's the home team, and we have a great network of passionate independent podcasters who have shows around sports, music, culture, travel, the whole nine. We really cover a lot of subjects on the network, and I'm proud to represent 19 Media Group. And I encourage you to follow 19 Media Group on all platforms, 19M Group on Twitter, 19 Media Group on Instagram, 19 Media Group on YouTube, the whole nine. All right, we got everything on there. You can tap in with all the shows and find their social pages on there. And keep in mind, everybody has merch available as well, so that's just an extra way for you to get the chance to support your favorite show. And of course, my link to my merch is always the last link in the show notes. All right. If you scroll down to the bottom of the description, you will see that it says represent the H2DG lifestyle. You know what I'm saying? So make sure you copy H2DG merch, copy your 19 Media Group merch, represent the home team that I'm happy to be a part of. But with all those things out the way, we can get right into today's latest NBA episode, very NBA hefty episode today. So if you are a returning listener, you already know how these episodes go, right? But if you are new to the show, this episode is going to be organized by the format that pays homage to the classic hip hop song structure. All right, I got three verses for you today, which represents three topics for the show. All right, the first verse always has to set the tone. The middle one brings the climax or the rising action. And then your last verse has to be the haymaker. You have to have the best verse for last. And since we always got to start verse one off with a bang, I got to start with that trade, that blockbuster trade that brought a bang to the NBA just before training camps began, in the trade in which we saw Karl-Anthony Towns go to the New York Knicks. Wow, man. In an out of nowhere trade just days before media day. it was announced that Karl-Anthony Towns would be traded to the New York Knicks for Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. And as I was sitting at home, pretty much, I'm sure like you, right? I'm sitting at home like, what the heck? I could only, my mind couldn't help but drift to where Cat himself was feeling, right? Because before I get into the basketball part of this trade, I want to talk a little bit about the human side first, right? Like, because I genuinely felt for Cat, even when he was finally able to make it to New York and he was able to do interviews about the trade once it became official, right? Like, you could still see some of that shock in his demeanor, right? That understandable shock that he had on his face as he was likely dealing with the excitement of playing for the team his family grew up loving, right? Along with the sudden grief that comes with leaving a place he called home for the past, what, 9 years. And it was funny because like Cat seemed to avoid all the trade rumors the past few seasons. Like if you really think about it, Cat has been in trade rumors the past maybe 3 to 4 seasons. And it comes at a point where the Timberwolves finally became like a legit Western Conference threat. Dare I say contender. Um, and it was wild that he actually got traded when most of us, I'm sure, expected that to be the least thing that was going to happen to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Um, he was there in the ugly stages, man. Like he grew up with that team. When they had a nice trio of himself, Andrew Wiggins, Zach LaVine. Like they were that youth core right there looked really good for the future. But obviously, things changed with Zach LaVine, and then the snowball kind of rolled, and eventually Andrew Wiggins was traded out of there, and Cat was really the guy there, and sure they had their playoff appearances and things of that nature, but the Minnesota Timberwolves, they were kind of just a low expectation team for the most part. And finally, here they are at this point where they're like, you got to take them seriously. But see, now suddenly you have to pack your bags after all of that. And even that, right, pun intended, everybody talks about Cat the way he said that after all that. But jokes aside, like I was thinking about that heavy because like they say, the NBA is a business, man, and sometimes it's confusing and sometimes it sucks. Sometimes it sucks. And I even think of like the way the Minnesota community rallied around Cat, when he lost his mom. Like you think of that stuff. Um, and it seemed like just when things were getting on the up and up, boom, Cat's traded. Like, what? And to think of the timing of the trade too, right? Like you're literally getting prepped to build off the previous season. Like I'm sure Cat's mindset was like, I can't wait to get back to camp and get back with the guys and really have a build off what we did the last year. All of a sudden, you're traded to the New York Knicks. Now, and Cat got traded at the best and the worst time of the year because of that, right? On the plus, you get traded like a week before media day. So you get to experience a full season in New York. You get to experience training camp. You get to experience preseason, the whole nine, right? That gives you some time to adjust. But then on the negative, right? Within a week, pretty much, you have to start to adjust to a new city, find a new home, find footing with new coaches, new teammates, a new offensive role a little bit, right? Like just literally days before he probably anticipated doing all that for the Timberwolves, his mind has to shift and now do that for a whole different franchise. Like, yeah, the NBA is a business, but like I said, sometimes it be tripping. I can only imagine how Cat felt beyond basketball. Like, put basketball aside, I'm sure that was a lot for him as a human being. But, fortunately for Cat, with all that said, he is entering a very, very dope and pretty dreamlike situation for him. So that part I'm happy for. And I'm gonna get straight to it. I think the Knicks, in my eyes, are trying to merge the tenacity and team basketball that they were known for in the 90s while embracing the new school style of pace and space offense. I think that's why they've really emerged as one of the more fun teams to watch, especially comparing it to, what the Knicks have dealt with. to the past like 2 decades now, they're really in a fun, exciting place. And I think, getting OG Anunoby and then now getting Mikal Bridges together, that's a good defensive duo on the wings. Especially knowing that allegedly, right, they really went for Mikal Bridges just so they could compete with the Boston Celtics and have two, of some of the better defenders in the league contain Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, two of the best offensive duos in the league. Um, and I think OG Anunoby, he's got some underrated offensive game. I think Mikal Bridges, he was an extremely efficient 3-and-D player for Phoenix before getting brief experience as kind of a go-to guy in Brooklyn. So I think like Mikal Bridges is going to go right back to that role in Phoenix, but at the same time, he has that confidence now to help out Jalen Brunson, to help out Cat offensively, right? And be a little bit more than a 3-and-D guy. And you put two guys that can pretty much do that with these all-stars in Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns. It gives the Knicks more versatility, probably the most versatility they've had in a while, if not ever, right? I think losing Dante DiVincenzo, that was a tough blow. He was like their best 3-point shooter. But I think with the still having the scrappy, all around player that Josh Hart is, once Mitchell Robinson hopefully can stay healthy, he's a great rim protector for them. Energy guys like Campaign, Miles McBride, Precious Achua, like the Knicks, they look like they have their sights on what they hope is a deep playoff run this year. And something that I've been joking about, like to my friends, is like y- the Knicks. It's fun energy now. Like they might have to make Eddie too, uh, because they got a good squad, and New York definitely is on the up and up, in the Garden. But even with preseason games underway too, like Mikal Bridges fits right in. Like he's one of those glue guy players. Like no matter where he plays, he's going to be effective. So he fits great there. I think Cat's ability as a catch and shoot stretch big and a guy that, he loved to make the selfless pass, right? Like he wears 32 because his dad, put him on to Magic Johnson, right? And Karl-Anthony Towns has said, like, I enjoy passing the ball as much as anything. And even as a big man, like, I wanted that to be something that was a part of my game because I loved watching Magic Johnson. Like, my dad put me on to him. So I think he's got a great opportunity to kind of feed that desire a little bit in New York, with this kind of team. Um, and obviously, like those DHOs with Jalen Brunson already look amazing. They're going to be flawless. And that's like obviously Cat can DHO to Jalen Brunson, but Cat is a very skilled, stretch forward. Like he can keep the DHO. He could fake the pass, fake the handoff to Jalen, drive inside. Like Cat, like that's going to be a dangerous thing the New York Knicks are going to be able to kind of use as like their bread and butter, if you will, for that offense. I think the Knicks are going to be a team to watch for sure this season. The NBA is always good when, those guys in the blue and orange are winning. And, I'm excited to see how it blends this year. But on the flip side, what does this trade mean for Minnesota? Right? Because, to me, it's exciting for New York, but Minnesota, I had mixed reviews about it. I had mixed reviews about it. Contrary to Cat, I think Julius Randle was rumored to be traded once everybody saw how nice the Knicks looked, even without, his all-star level of play. So we kind of saw this coming, right? We didn't think it'd be Minnesota, but we certainly saw a trade on the horizon. Um, like I said, we didn't expect it to be Cat, but it was in the air. And I gotta be honest, I like I said, I wasn't really feeling this part of the trade. Now, don't get me wrong, Julius Randle, dog. Dante DiVincenzo, dog. With that defensive and doggish group they got over there, I like that. I like it in that standpoint. But my first thoughts were number one, as good as Julius Randle is, he has shown to succumb to double teams in the playoffs. I feel like I've been saying this since I started hip to the games. That has just been the Achilles heel for Julius Randle. His game, he just hasn't found a way to overcome those double teams and still be effective come playoff time. And keep in mind, as big as a flaw as that was for the Knicks in the playoffs, things haven't really changed by getting Karl-Anthony Towns because now you get rid of that problem with Julius Randle, but you bring in Karl-Anthony Towns' foul troubles, right? That was something that's his playoff flaw. He seems to get in foul trouble a lot. And then, of course, that can shrink your minutes, right? You're not on the floor as much when you're in foul trouble. So it's like, it's kind of even trade. Like, did you, for both Minnesota and the New York Knicks, like when it matters the most, right? Because regular season is going to be dope, but playoff time, when it matters the most, is this really the trade that y'all think it is in y'all's heads? That was my honest thoughts at first. Um, like I said, I think you trade for a big with a very similar skill set. Because let's be real, Julius Randle and Karl-Anthony Towns on a great day can both can both get you 24, 10, and 4 assists, right? They're gonna do it in different ways, but they are some of the best power forwards in the NBA, right? So I think that's kind of the good part of that trade where they'll both find their footing, I think, very quickly on the teams that they were traded to because it's really not much different, right? It's not like a lot of these teams are going to have to change their offensive systems drastically because they got these guys. It's more so like, hey, let's see how we can work Julius Randle with Ant Edwards. What are some things he does differently than Karl-Anthony Towns, and likewise, right? What are some things that we can do with Karl-Anthony Towns that we couldn't do with Julius Randle per se, right? That's going to be the cool part. But at the same time, these are two players who both have pretty glaring flaws come playoff time, and that's what I'm worried about. You know, and then my next thought was clearly the Timberwolves picked Nas Reed over Karl-Anthony Towns long term because you pick Nas Reed to be this long-term partner with Anthony Edwards, right? And don't get me wrong, Nas Reed is an amazing basketball player, very unique, I feel like, in that way. With at his size to do some of the things that he does, very guard-like in a big man's body, right? And Nas, he's going to be looking for that bag in a couple years, right? Likely from Minnesota, but like say he doesn't become this perennial all-star, or maybe another team at some point comes with a more intriguing offer. Maybe they want to give him more money, and that's going to lean towards Nas a little bit, right? Like Nas Reed has game, but in my eyes, nothing beats that continuity that was established last season. Like if you know me by now and you've been listening to the show, I'm an old soul at heart. I'm very old school NBA at times. So like continuity is something that I value like up here. And like I said, I just think it's interesting that Minnesota, they finally get to where they, okay, like we can build off this. Like we're a winning team. Then you just blow it up with one of your most important players. It messes with the continuity a little bit. Um, and all that said, though, I was reminded by a coworker recently that Julius, while he's not like the great defender, right, but at a smaller, more solid, stronger base, than Karl-Anthony Towns, he should serve as a better perimeter defender than Cat, which further promotes that versatile defense Minnesota not only desires but will have to play as teams try to force Rudy Gobert out the paint, right? And having that extra mobility to tighten up those defensive rotations and make them sharper and more timely, that's going to be a plus with both Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo, in the fold for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And, I think additionally, Dante, speaking of him, he had a great year last year, averaging 15 on 41% from three, a nice shooter to surround Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle with. Again, Julius Randle being that 24 point per game scorer, like that's a guy that's never scared to shoot. You're never scared to take a shot, never scared to take the last shot. This is a very solid option to help take pressure off Anthony Edwards. Like, please don't miss what I'm saying. Julius Randle is I think in a lot of ways over hated in to some degree. I think he's got game. He's really nice, but like I said, some of those playoff moments. I'm interested to see how he handles those, and especially like how that chemistry is going to be with Anthony Edwards. Because let's be real, they both have kind of a similar mentality of where like they want the last shot, they want to make the big play because they're fearless. It's not a selfish thing, right? It's just because they're so confident, they want to come through. So that'll be interesting to see, what their chemistry is going to look like. Um, I'm excited to see how those two will trade buckets this year. Contrary to many fans believing that the two will have trouble finding a balance, but again, even with some of that excitement though, I just still have some questions for Minnesota because, do you experiment with Naz Reid, Julius Randle, and Rudy Gobert on the floor all at the same time? Chris Finch has a hard decision right there. Do you suffer from lack? Do you sacrifice lack of spacing? Or do you sacrifice rim protection and bench Gobert, right? And then even then, right, Rudy Gobert catches a lot of flack for being benched. You can take him out of games, if you force him out the paint. And in this year's Olympics, he was benched, right? Like he didn't even play for his home. He didn't even start some games for his home team. So, and then like, is it better to have the front court of the McDaniels, Reed, and Randall, even though you're going to be missing that rim protection, but it's going to be better for spacing? Like, how is this going to work? And then I think the even bigger question, how do you believe that this move pushes you closer to a championship? Because in my eyes, I think the move will be nice in the short term, but in the long term, I think one of my first thoughts was like, I think Anthony Edwards is going to have to get out of here like Kevin Garnett did. Like at the end of the day, just a poorly managed team, despite the talent that it may have had, um, just the players that had been in and out, right? Whether it was through trade or injury or what have you, like at the end of the day, your star is only going to be able to take so much. And if it's poorly managed, they're gone, you know? And like I feel like Anthony Edwards might be on that course. Like Kevin Garnett in '07, right? You just might reach a breaking point where, the Minnesota Timberwolves just kind of fumbled. Um, when the Timberwolves are in contention, they tend not to stay there long. If you look back to Kevin Garnett's career there, right? Like in 2004, that was an amazing year, but they didn't really get back to that. And again, I know there were some injuries to a guy like Sam Cassell, right? And like I said, I just think poor management. Um, and they almost remind me of the Pacers in that way, right? Like even though Indiana has a much better track record of success, obviously they've been around longer as a franchise, but still, like they've made NBA finals, they've made conference finals. They've had some really dope teams. They just ran into better talent, right? Uh, it's Minnesota is almost like the Western Conference version of that. It's like no matter how good they do, they don't necessarily scare me long term. Like I know how this story ends, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. Like I hope Minnesota figures this thing out, and they, especially with Anthony Edwards in that jersey, like make the most of that. But while this can prove to be one of the more underrated trades out there, I do think Minnesota has a lot of questions to answer, not just now, but in the future also. I don't even think Terrell Owens had his popcorn ready for this Knicks and Wolves trade. So, that shows you how wild it is. But of course, these were just my 2 cents on what transpired over the recent days. But what are your thoughts? Does this trade help the Knicks get closer to their longtime championship hopes? Am I sleeping on what the Timberwolves just did with this trade? Or, are they indeed in for a more questionable future, right? Or a return in their investment? Be sure to share your thoughts with me down below. Whether that's again, if you're on audio platforms, if you're on YouTube, whatever it is, hit me up on the socials, right? At Hip to the Games, at Desmond Powell _. I would love to, read and hear your thoughts on these topics as well. Verse 1 definitely got us off to a bang right now, and I'm just getting warmed up. All right. And my hoops talk continues going into verse 2, where I want to take a minute to highlight a Western Conference team looking to get back into the playoff mix. But first, if you do like what you're hearing on Hip to the Games and want to know how you can show some support and love to the podcast, here's how you can do that. As a fan of Hip to the Games, not only should you show your love for the podcast, but you gotta express your love for basketball and hip hop. With a wide variety of clothing and accessories, there is always a way to show how much the game of basketball and the game of rap means to you. Let everybody know what it means to be hip to the games by clicking the link in the episode's description to cop some merch and represent the H2DG lifestyle. All right, welcome back to Hip to the Games as we get into verse 2, our first climax of the song, if you will. And as we get into this second verse, I want to take a second to highlight one of my favorite moves of the offseason. And that was the Sacramento Kings getting DeMar Derozan. DeMar's career arc has been interesting. You know, he spends the first chunk of his career as a Toronto Raptor, trying to take the baton from Vince Carter. Shout out. He's getting inducted into the Hall of Fame as of the time of this recording. He's getting inducted today. So shout out VC, shout out Vince Sanity, one of the dopest players of all time. Arguably, but like not so arguably the greatest dunker of all time. I mean, shout out Vince, man. 22 seasons in the league or something like that. Like incredible career. One of the most slept on players in the NBA ever, really. I think, again, is kind of in that underrated category because you're so wowed by his athleticism and his highlights, you forget just how dope of an all-around player he was. So shout out to Vince. But yeah, DeMar DeRozan certainly starts his career kind of with that shadow behind him. Um, and he helps take the Raptors to places they've never been, like literally, he which in part he successfully did that. But then just when you thought he'd spend his whole career there, he gets traded to San Antonio. And again, which is very weird because I've said this before, right? Like, ISO players don't necessarily fit with Greg Popovich's system long term, right? Like if you're playing for the San Antonio Spurs, it's a lot of ball movement, right? It's no secret why they never really had a lot of ISO players in their franchise history because even again when they had Kawhi Leonard, that was pretty much why he demanded a trade. At least I know there was a lot of controversy with that, but in my eyes, at least, I think that's why he demanded a trade. And of course, DeMar, obviously he ended up leaving as well. It brought some of the best playmaking numbers of his career, and I think really matured him as a basketball player and as a leader. Playing under the legendary Coach Pop. Um, but after that, he goes to Chicago. And again, a weird situation because people didn't think he would go to a team like that. And again, having a guy like Zach LaVine there already, who was pretty much a younger kind of version of DeMar in the sense that slasher, athletic, right? Can shoot, but very, very much so athletic and getting his points around the rim. A very like you didn't see that duo coming. Especially, when you would have thought he would have picked his hometown LA Lakers, right? Like, or a different contender. He goes to Chicago and almost makes us a contender. Um, so again, interesting career arc. And now here he is, he's found himself uh and excuse me, before I transition, one thing I want to mention about the Chicago thing too is that he was back in the Eastern Conference, right? Which is generally the slower, more gritty conference compared to the West, right? The West is more up tempo, fast paced, really for like the past 2 or even 3 decades, right? Like that's kind of what the Western Conference has always been known for. And I think again, that's why DeMar DeRozan found himself playing some of his best basketball, right? Because it was just like Toronto. It was slower, a little bit slower pace compared to the West. He got to be the main guy again. He got to take the shot at the buzzer, you know. It wasn't the ball movement emphasis that the San Antonio Spurs had. Like he was more free in Chicago, and he got to remind people that he is one of the coldest scorers of his era. So now it's like he flips back and goes to the West with the Sacramento Kings. And again, right, could have went to LA again, either of the LA teams, right? I know he was thinking about Miami, thinking about Philly, but he picks the Kings, and you know he's closer to home than he's ever been. He's rocking the number 10 again, right? Like, and based on his style of play, and really the small sample that we've gotten so far in the preseason, like DeMar seems to be ready to ride out the rest of his career, not necessarily having to be the main ball handler, but still play as a very useful and cold scoring threat. So like that's really where my excitement comes from because this has looked exactly how I imagined it would. Although it's preseason, right at the time of this recording, in his first game, DeMar dropped 15 points and he didn't miss a single shot. He went 6 of 6 from the field, and they were simple buckets, man. And I think that's exactly what happens when you pair one of the best mid-range shooters and one of the best slashers of his era with one of the best pick and roll bigs in today's game in Domantas Sabonis. Mike Brown and the Sacramento Kings, they knew what had to be done. right? Okay, we got DeMar DeRozan. All right, spam those dribble handoffs, spam those double drag plays, right? Those off-ball screens. Let DeMar curl and choose to drive or pull up. Like give him options and at the same time not put wear and tear on his body by having him bring the ball up, having him at the top with a high pick and roll every trip down, right? Like that's what De'Aaron Fox is for, you know. And even then, De'Aaron Fox is very skilled himself, right? De'Aaron Fox has a lot of he's a point guard, but he has a lot of kind of two guard shot creation skill, you know, that I think really goes under the radar when you think of how explosive and how fast he is as a basketball player. But, you know, I really think DeMar just gives that kind of almost Thanos balance, you know, to that team because now it's like you already had a dope 1-2 punch with De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, but now you got DeMar DeRozan and you can take that, but then add this new piece and make it this whole like you extend the myriad of options that you already had by just simply adding another dynamic pick and roll threat who can score from the mid range, inside the paint, in the post. And contrary to what most people think, even though he doesn't take a lot of threes, DeMar DeRozan, he can shoot threes. You know, I know his percentages have kind of been up and down throughout his career, but he can take and make threes. He's probably not going to make three or four, but that doesn't mean he just can't knock down an open shot when they need it, right? So you know, I see a lot of that with this fit, you know. And again, you look at that first game versus the Warriors, right? Like you saw how his first shot, he got the dribble handoff from Sabonis and he rose up, right? He kind of faked the going around and just pulled up right over Draymond. Then the next time he uh he got the curl opportunity, got a layup. Then the next time he got another DHO, but this time he drove, pulled up at the elbow. Like a lot of options, the Kings will have with Sabonis and DeMar alone, as if, like I said, they already didn't have a lethal weapon in De'Aaron Fox. So I'm excited for that. But like I said earlier, the main reason, in my opinion, why this works is because DeMar DeRozan was always a simple-minded scorer. He has what all the great scorers of the past have. They keep the game simple. No extra dribbles, no wasted movements. He takes what the defense gives him and is skilled enough to convert, right? So while he's always been a very pick and roll heavy player, similar to a guy like D Wade, right? D Wade was more of a slasher, but of course had a lot of mid range game. A lot of pick and rolls were run through D Wade. Same thing with DeMar DeRozan. If you look at his career, lots of pick and roll opportunities. He's had as many pick and roll opportunities as some of the starting point guards around the league. So that just shows you, you know, how crazy this dynamic can be and how much he fits with this system, and even with that in mind, right? Because he's able to split those opportunities now because he's playing with De'Aaron Fox. DeMar DeRozan is able to play even more off the ball, and which at this late stage of his career is going to even extend some of his buckets a little bit, right? And extend his career a little bit because it's like I don't have that stress on my body of being the main ball handler. And like I said, he's a simple scorer. If I want to make a quick comparison here between, two of my favorite players, it's, you know, I look at DeMar DeRozan and he has a very it's he has a very set in stone game, right? You know what you're going to get from DeMar DeRozan. Even if it is pick and roll, he can pull up for the mid range, he can pump fake, draw a foul, hit the mid range. He can hit you with a crossover, pull up. He can hit you with a crossover drive. Like he can post up, all those things. But then on the flip side, you have somebody like Paul George, who again, very great player, is literally like probably my favorite player that's active in the game right now. But at the same time, there are times I watch Paul George and he doesn't make the game as simple as it could be. Like I always say, if Paul George had Kevin Durant's shot selection, um, he would increase his scoring numbers. There are times where I find myself watching Paul George, and while I love his how aesthetically pleasing his game is, how he can score in three dribbles and make it look good, there are a lot of times that he doesn't always take what the defense gives him. DeMar DeRozan, on the other hand, is somebody who every trip down takes what the defense gives with him and lives with the result. And that simple-minded mindset is going to take him very far in a system like this. because DeMar's not going to play with the rock. He's going to it's straight to the point, right? If you like I said, if you look at those plays that I mentioned earlier from that Warriors preseason game, DeMar took what the defense gave him. He made a decision and he lived with that decision. 6 of 6 from the field. He wasn't trying to be flashy, right? He wasn't trying to try things just because it was preseason. It was like, no, this is how we're going to play this year, and I think it's going to be dangerous. Um, Now, the only thing I will say about this trade is that on the opposite side, I sense the concern about spacing for this team. Um, and like the lack of 3-point volume that the Sacramento Kings might experience with DeMar on the floor, especially out there with Domantas Sabonis, because Domantas was once a very, respectable stretch four. And he seemed to decrease his 3-point attempts drastically over the years. And I'm not sure why, to be honest. Maybe it was an injury or something like that, but that's it's kind of dangerous when you think about that. And then now having DeMar DeRozan, who is, again, like I said, more than capable of making threes, but he just doesn't shoot them at the volume that most of the analytic freaks would like him to shoot. And this is something DeMar had to deal with in Chicago, right? And again, me, obviously, Chicagoland area, being a Bulls fan, I saw a lot of games where we could have won if we had shooting, right? And a lack of 3-point opportunities in today's game means less points. And if you can't defend, those games will be losses. I can almost guarantee you that they will be losses because that's just the name of the game now. You got to be able to keep up with the threes, right? And again, I don't want to again me being old soul, you don't got to Mike D'Antoni and shoot a three every possession, but it's just like if you're not taking as many threes and you're not being able to defend, it's going to show. It's going to show. And to me, that's the difference between the Sacramento Kings being that sleeper kind of Western Conference Finals threat and just having a repeat of last year being in the play-in, right? So I'm nervous for that. Now I like that Sacramento does have shooting though. It's not like my Chicago Bulls the last couple of years where we kind of just didn't have shooters. Keegan Murray, like they have weapons from downtown. Keegan Murray is automatic. Malik Monk is streaky. He can get hot and then it's just over with. Like you could forget about it as a defender. We'll see what Keon Ellis does, with likely full-time starter minutes this year after shooting 41% from deep last year. And then, we'll see if Kevin Huerter can have a bounce back season after shooting a while respectable 36% from three. Again, I know 36% from three is almost seen as very average nowadays just because of how the 3-point shot has evolved, but 36% is something, you can't sleep on. And at the same time for Kevin Huerter, it was the lowest of his career thus far. But the good news is, with viable options to stretch the floor and the extra pressure a guy like DeMar DeRozan is going to demand, there should be some extra wide open shots to go around for not just the role players, but, even Fox and DeRozan themselves, So if Sacramento can take advantage of that, I think DeMar's bold prediction of the Kings having a chance at the Western Conference Finals isn't as far-fetched as it initially sounded. And one thing's for sure, it will be an absolute dogfight to get there. Like this is the wild, wild west. All right. You cannot just be running around saying that you're going to make the Western Conference Finals because there's about 10 teams in that conference who can probably get 50 wins. So, or at the very least 45. So yeah, but I think DeMar DeRozan's fit in that system might put them in a similar position that we saw 2 seasons ago, right, where they were like the fourth seed in the West, and that can be scary for opponents this season because let's not forget they probably should have won that series versus Golden State if it wasn't for the heroics of Stephen Wardell or Wardell Stephen Curry. So I say all that to say the Warriors, the Sacramento Kings rather can be definitely be scary this year. A more brief verse here, but I just had to share my thoughts on the Kings' new look with DeMar out there. But now I want to know what you think about the acquisition for the Sacramento Kings. All right, can they finish top four in the West? Is that a realistic thing for them? How will they fare in the playoffs? How do you see the spacing situation going? Or are they still looking at the play-in? Are you not buying it? Is Dez tripping? You got to let me know. Hit me up on the socials and comment. I would love to see what you think. But for now, that's two verses down. And one more to go as I want to get into the a theme of second year evaluations as I present three scenarios that I expect to improve from the previous season. So all off season, and if I'm honest, maybe even late into the this past season, like the regular season and the playoffs, there were several scenarios where I was watching games and saying to myself, it might look bad now, but next year might be crazy. And today I decided to discuss three of them for our last verse. I want to talk about Damian Lillard's second year in Milwaukee, Jordan Poole's second year in Washington, and then the Houston Rockets' second year with this young core. All right, so let's start with Damian Lillard and the Milwaukee Bucks. I won't lie. I fell for the okie doke last year, and I got crazy hyped about the possibility or the idea of a Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo duo. I knew Boston had it in them. Like I said, I just felt it in the air all season that this was going to be the year where Boston finally got over that hump and won a championship. And lo and behold, that's what they did. But at the same time, it was hard to picture a Damian Lillard who had just averaged 32 points a game, and then the Greek freak on one team and not get back to the finals and still having a guy like Chris Middleton, right? Of course, they had their injury struggles early in the year and late in the year come playoff time, right? We saw Giannis get sidelined to injury, and then eventually Dame's body broke down on him. So there was a really like there was such a small window of success. It was really like the middle of the season pretty much. And that was it. And since I think Dame was shut down towards the after the All-Star break of 22-23 season, he spent a lot of that offseason rehabbing, and then I think dealing with personal matters, and then boom, you get traded and have to move to a whole new city after again another great 10, 11 years in Portland, right? Similar to something I just talked about with Karl-Anthony Towns. And so as you can imagine, that didn't set up the best transition for the Bucks and their new star point guard. And then now you throw in right that coaching change. They let go of Adrian Griffin. They bring in Doc Rivers, and it just seemed like the Bucks had a season full of adjustments and on the fly chemistry building, which again, not necessarily ideal when you have championship hopes. That never really results in immediate success. So that's why this year, I think with Dame being able to put in that offseason work, and I think Doc Rivers being in charge from the jump, Chris Middleton being healthy, the Bucks should be better this year. I think Dame should be more consistent if he can stay, healthy. I think that was the thing that threw a lot of people off last year. People were saying, "Oh, what's wrong with Dame? What's wrong with Dame?" And I'm like, "Well, probably because the brother couldn't really train in the offseason. It's probably because the brother just moved to Milwaukee. Probably because the brother has to get used to playing with another all-star talent and primary ball handler in Giannis Antetokounmpo. Probably because the brother has to get used to a new coach system, right? Like all of these things are gonna add up. So I think this year he can relax. He has last season to look at and learn from. Things should get into the fold a little more, you know. But I do worry, that we'll see from Doc Rivers what we've been known to see over the past several seasons, and lack of adjustments come playoff time, right? That's the thing with Doc Rivers. He seems to be a last minute adjuster. Um, Great coach, respectable coach, um, but good motivator. Played in the NBA himself, right? He's a player's coach. That's why people love playing for him, and he always has a job, pretty much. He's won a championship. His longevity, right, is respectable. However, despite winning it all with the '08 Celtics, he hasn't been able to lead a team to that since. They couldn't get past LA in 2010, which was a great series, right? They just lost to a great competitive team. They couldn't overcome LeBron in the Heat a few years later, right? They lost to a younger, great competitive team. Couldn't get the Lob City Clippers over the hump, although they had injury troubles. They struggled in the 2020 bubble, right? Having a 3-1 lead over Denver that they should have won. And then he struggled to get the Sixers over the hump in 2021 and 2023. So, he can foster the perfect environment to get you there. But what about after that? That's my concern with Milwaukee and what this second year is going to look like with this group. I think the dynamic of Dame and Giannis is something Doc has never had. And at the same time, is if you think about it, he's like the perfect coach to foster that because he's had that situation, right? He had to balance the all-star talents that, Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, and Kevin Garnett were. He had to balance the all-star talents that Chris Paul and Blake Griffin were. He had to balance the talents that Paul George and Kawhi Leonard were. And even then, right, Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell, like six-man candidates, right? So and again, doing it with James Harden, Joel Embiid, like that's something that I'm not afraid of. But and again, having a healthy Chris Middleton can make that even more dangerous because you just have pretty much a threat at every important position. You have a bigger guy in Giannis, a point guard in Damian Lillard, and then Chris Middleton can get you buckets on the wing. So that to me is like the good thing. Obviously, you have Bobby Portis still playing some of his best basketball here. I like them stealing Gary Trent Jr. from the Raptors. And who he has experience with Damian Lillard. He's kind of has some of that 3-and-D potential there. The Bucks still have like they have a good team. They can go as far as they hope, but we'll have to see if they can hang with teams like Boston, New York, and even Philly when it matters. That's my thing for Milwaukee. You have some chemistry now. Let's see if we can get over the hump and really get to where we're supposed to be. And everybody's got to be dialed in to do that. Now, my second scenario doesn't involve a contender at all, but it involves one of the more polarizing players in the league, Jordan Poole. And, I said this the minute he got traded to Washington last offseason. He's going to be excited to get to run the show for his own team after experiencing a six-man role with the Warriors where he helped bring home the chip in 2022. But with that is going to come with a lot of immaturity and a lot of experimenting, right? The Wizards aren't expected to win, so he's going to be even more bold in his shot selection and decision making. Essentially, Jordan Poole is going to have fun being the guy until he realizes what being the guy actually entails. And that's exactly what happened. His once crafty scoring ability that served as an X factor for the Warriors was game planned for on a nightly basis, right? His shot selection looked worse now that he didn't have the roar of Warrior fans to rally behind him and boost his confidence. And more touches means more pressure to lead a team. Something brand new for Jordan. And like I said, I remember tweeting like that year too. I wasn't even tripping about year one Jordan Poole. The real test is year two Jordan Poole. Did you learn from the previous experience? Right? This should be the year where he takes his role seriously and gets past that honeymoon stage of being a primary ball handler for a team. Right? You get past the honeymoon stage and you realize, okay, I'm in a committed relationship. Right? I think that's kind of what Jordan Poole is going through right now. Like, will I commit? It's that kind of that self-assessment, like how will I fare in this situation? I think, like I said, very much honeymoon at first, but then you realize after a while, you know, okay, like decisions have to be made, commitments have to be made. Like, how can I still be my best self, um, and not just be in it for the cute moments, right? I think that's exactly what this year is for Jordan Poole. Um, and I'm anxious to see like what this is going to look like. Even with the little bit I've seen of the preseason, I think you can see it already. He just kind of has that bounce in his step, like, okay, like, I heard the chatter from last year, and it's time to get to business. He seems ready to apply what he's learned off the mistakes of last year, and run the point guard as opposed to being the shooting guard. I think that's going to even be more comfortable for him. Um, and hopefully that means he can return as a 20-point per game scorer and even get some career assist numbers and, truly reveal that star-esque potential that we got glimpses of in a Warrior jersey. I think that's hopefully what I want to see this year from Jordan Poole. To me, this is the year he straightens up his act and hopefully draws more people back to the pool party, right? And just as long as he shows that, he benefited from that rough, although rough and hard and, discouraging learning experience, it's something that I think is going to be valuable for him. If he applies all of those lessons this season. So I'm excited for that. Again, I know casuals, ain't really watching the Wizards like that, but that's been on my mind for literally the past season. So I hope Jordan Poole can figure it out this year. And then lastly, I want to highlight the Houston Rockets because while everybody talks about the depth a team like OKC has, the Rockets are right there with them when you think about it. I think it just looks ugly because they're not getting 50 wins, right? I think it looks ugly because that team is so full of young and raw talent. Jalen Green is going into year 4 trying to make that leap as an all-star player. And, I think we'll see how Jabari Smith, fits and how he improves this year as somebody who also looks to make a leap individually. And then, they got Amen Thompson, who looks like a nice two-way playmaker. And then, even then, they just drafted one of the studs of the Summer League, Reed Shepherd, who drew Steve Nash comparisons with his patient decision-making and shooting ability. And then still, right, they got Cam Whitmore, who slipped in last year's draft despite being seen as one of the best, if not the best, uh shot creators of the class. And to think like all this talent that they have, all these young guys who want the ball, who want their opportunity, and still their best player is Alperen Sengun, who fits more of the Jokic, Demonis, Sabonis play style. And I still didn't mention Fred VanVleet, right? Former NBA champ with the Raptors, who can get buckets and run the offense in his own right. So, like, you see what I mean? You have all these names and all these guys who, like, not necessarily just want, but need the basketball. And yet your best player is a guy who's more of that Jokic type, right? A playmaker from the post, which again is going to require cutting, selflessness, passing up the good shot for the better shot. That's what I'm going to be looking for with Houston. This is truly one of those, like, y'all do realize there's just one basketball out there, right? Like, I think it's kind of it's one of those kind of moments. But at the same time, I think that's what makes them scary, especially long term. I think Ime Udoka, really brought some maturity and some grit and some toughness, um, and maturity to that team. And then, unfortunately, they're just in a stacked Western Conference, so they missed out on the playoffs. But this year, and they had some games versus some contenders and some teams where you were like, they put up a dogfight, right? And I think this year, while like I think there might be a lane for them to get in, if I'm honest, get in that playoff hunt, because I think if they really figure out how to balance all that young talent and shot creation and potential with the playmaking that Sengun can provide, in my eyes, they just have too much raw talent to use Sengun, like Jokic. Um, and one of the worst things you can do is turn a player who needs the ball into strictly a catch and shoot guy, right? There are some things that Ime Udoka is going to have to figure out here, because if he can find a way to unleash those young dogs that they got while fostering a system that best fits with that skill set Alperen Sengun has, it can get scary real fast. It can get scary real fast. Or as I tweeted, Houston will be bringing problems as opposed to having them, right? But I just can't help but wonder, will some trades have to be made for this team because there's just so much young talent? Is there going to be a sacrifice where you just have to trade somebody not because you wanted to, but simply because you had to? Simply because it just gave more room for what you were trying to do offensively. Um, are there too many cooks in the kitchen? These are, I think, especially if they're winning, right? These are things that are kind of gonna questions that are gonna answer themselves as the season progresses. So only time will tell. But as of now, the Houston Rockets seem ready to take off if all goes well. Like I said, a lot of young talent. I think if they can find a way to make it work with Sengun, like that's going to be a really dangerous team. Like we can't sleep on Houston this year because they have just as much depth and potential as a team like OKC has. Well, I don't know. I don't know about the draft picks, but hey, on paper, they got it. They got it. So those are three of my year 2 scenarios that I'll have my eyes on this year. But I know there are plenty of others in general that I didn't mention, right? Like, for example, I think, is this the Clippers' last chance before a rebuild? Do the acquisitions of Buddy Hield and DeAnthony Melton give the Warriors a refresh, right? Talk to your boy, man. I know there's a lot more out there that I didn't share in this episode, and especially these scenarios. I would love to hear you respond to mine and even drop your own in the comments. All right. That way we can keep an eye out for each other's predictions and thoughts on everything going on in the association. And with that final verse, we have made it to the end of another Hip to the Games episode. From the Knicks and Wolves trade, DeMar Derozan and the Kings, and a trio of sophomore scenarios. Lots of good discussion here on the NBA. But as always, these were just my thoughts. So I want to hear from you. You can tweet the show at Hip to the Games or tag me directly on Twitter and IG at Desmond Powell _ and share your thoughts on any of the topics discussed today, as I would love to hear or read your thoughts. And I simply want to say thank you for being hip to the games and listening to another episode of H2DG, all for the love of the best combo there is. And of course, here's a huge shout out to you for being hip to the games. Peace out and God bless. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Hip to the Games, and if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit up the socials at Desmond Powell _ and at Hip to the Games on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok so you don't miss out on the fun. And please follow or subscribe to the show and leave a review on the podcast platform you're on right now, as your support is greatly appreciated.